Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today?
Great.
Awesome. That was not very enthusiastic, even for government work. So let's get some enthusiasm. Like, hey, some good morning or something. Somebody.
Good morning.
All right. All right. We like to try and liven it up a little bit. So I'm going to talk to you today about some executive dashboarding, some decisions we've made in GSA, where we're going in the future, and how we're really trying to impact positive change in the government. But first, to do that, I kind of have to go on a long, winding backstory to kind of explain how we got here and why we got here. I do apologize if I sound like Marge Simpson's sister. My voice has been, I've been on a parallel course with laryngitis for the last week or so, so if it goes out, I apologize. I'll just ask one of my colleagues to stand in for me. Speaking of, I couldn't have done this without Bill Wolf and Steve McFarland here. You know, if you look at us, you probably don't see any difference, but if you put the three of us in a room, you quickly realize we are complete opposites in every way. And that's what makes a good data team, really, is you have different people with different thoughts, and there's no one way of looking at something, and so that's why we're able to create these things and come together, is because you have a great team. So if you so happen, I am on Twitter, but I mostly just tweet about sports. It's pretty boring, really. Very passionate about the Jaguars, Auburn Tigers, the U.S. men's soccer team, maybe not so much anymore for a while. And I am on LinkedIn if you care, but I do like to find articles on LinkedIn, so it's kind of great. I do have a few things up here. I call them trinkets of crap, but you know, they may be useless to you now, but after a few beers at Data Night Out, you might come to appreciate it a little bit more. So I will ask a few questions throughout. I'm going to try and make it a little interactive, and hopefully, if some of you know the answers, you'll get one of these awesome toys. Some pretty neat stuff up here, and you can feel free to trade or whatnot. But all right, so what is GSA? GSA is the General Services Administration. We have two divisions. Who knows the two divisions? That does not work for GSA. Anybody? Nobody? All right, two main divisions. Okay, go ahead, Will.
FAS and PBS.
Yes, FAS and PBS. You get a car. Oh, sorry. So FAS stands for Federal Acquisition Service. PBS stands for Public Building Service. PBS is basically all the federal buildings, leases, anything associated with that. FAS is everything else. FAS is directly responsible for providing services, solutions, products, commercial products. Essentially anything that doesn't go boom or bang, is not fresh food, and a few other little tiny things that are custom specialty things, that nuclear warheads or things like that. CASE. CASE stands for Customer and Stakeholder Engagement. So how does that work? What is CASE? Why does the government have a division called Customer and Stakeholder Engagement? Well, you have in GSA, we have GSA, FAS and PBS, and under FAS, we have all these other solutions, we call them. Assisted acquisition services, property, network services, etc. And off to the right is this little thing called CASE. We are actually funded by all those other divisions. But how do all those other divisions get their money? Who here knows how FAS gets its money? Is FAS appropriated, or how else would FAS get their money? Does anybody know that question or answer? Yes? That's one way, yeah, absolutely. You get a cool little... Oh, sorry. We'll get that down. All right, so GSA is not, FAS is not appropriated by Congress, with the exception of a half portion of property. We actually get our money by acting like a business. So if we have a division called Assisted Acquisition, a government agency can actually contract with us and say, we want you to award this contract for us. We will pay you a fee. So they pay us a fee, and in return, we award the contract, manage the contract. Any of our contract vehicles, so we have other vehicles such as Alliant, which handles IT services, Oasis, which handles professional services, and then all these schedules where everybody can buy everything. I won't bore you with all the contract-related data, but the key takeaway from that is the time savings and money savings that GSA provides. So, does anybody know how long it takes an agency to award a typical contract on an open market contract? Keep going. 18 to 24 months, and sometimes longer. Depends on how many protests you get. 18 to 24 months. So what we've done is we've taken all this contract-related data and we're using it for our benefit to determine where can we hire, where should we be putting our best employees. Hey, government agency, when we go meet with you, here's how we can save you time and money. Because you probably believe it, but believe it or not, half of them don't even know where their contract dollars are going, when their contracts are expiring, and what they're going to do with it next. So I say that because if you can do things quicker and easier, that would tend to make sense. But in the realm of the government, that doesn't always make sense. So you end up with situations like this. Anybody seen this commercial recently? Oh, it's not showing. Well, sorry. I'll just ignore it. I'll just ignore it. Some things never change. It's the new Geico commercial, and it says, Geico's been top 10 in this, this, and this for however long. Yet some people still like to bang their head against a wall, and it shows a guy banging his head on a wall, lie down in poison ivy, and one other thing. It's kind of funny, but it's pretty related, and it's kind of true. Sadly, that's exactly how the government operates. You just bang your head against the wall. So let's see here. All right. So the funding that comes from them using our acquisition vehicles actually isn't paid by the government agencies. So if a government agency awards a contract, it's actually funded, it's called an IFF, so industrial funded fee, or a CAP, which is a contract access fee. So that's actually paid by the vendor or the contractor that's awarded the contract, and it's paid to GSA. So long story short, we're here to try and save money, all right? Well, in the past, we kind of just did our own thing. We would have CASE, which is customer and stakeholder engagement. Our job is to try and convince these agencies to do business with the government, basically, to do business with GSA. If you look at it, we're almost like business development people for the government. Sounds kind of weird, but if we can actually affect change in all these agencies, save them time and money, it actually saves them in the long run. So CASE is made up of 11 regions across the United States, a couple people in Europe too. And in our region, we have people located directly with the customers. So I have somebody in Orlando with the Army and the Navy. There's somebody on base at SOCOM. There's somebody at Patrick Air Force Base, and all over in the Southeast. And every region does something different. Other regions don't have anybody with their customer, and somebody sits in their house. And so we all have this own idea of how we're being successful. And whenever we thought we needed a new person to hire, all we had to do was write a business case. This is where it's all starting back to. About a year ago, I decided, I have this great idea of how we can actually convince the Navy to do more business with GSA. Let's create this whole new position that's never been done before. And so I wrote this business case, and it was a pretty good business case because it got approved. I didn't need the person. I just thought it was another way for us to enact change. And I thought, wow, that was pretty easy. And so then you look at the actual numbers, you look at each region and how much dollar spend they have. Dollar spend is where all the contracting dollars for all the government agencies are located. In our region, I think it's probably the largest. In other regions, they have the same number of people or really closely to us, and they have 10% of what the spend is. So people have been doing what I just did as a business case forever and not getting any results. You're hiring extra bodies. So enter the new administration, and we have a hiring freeze. Well, that put the nix on everything. Not only that, but our agency went through a massive reduction and budget cut. Our division alone, in just my region, we had to turn in 4 positions that were open, plus a bunch of other funding. So you go back to the drawing board, and it's actually a really good thing, because for the first time, we actually have a chance to actually make real change in the hiring process. Is it going to happen overnight? No, it never does. But part of the reason why we're going to be able to is this part of some of the dashboard things I'm going to show you is the reason why we're going to. The person who was supposed to be speaking with me, Irv Kaler, he was our regional commissioner, and now he has just been moved to the national assistant commissioner for CASE, my division. And so that's his sole goal, is to change basically the hiring mechanism within CASE nationally, get everybody on the same page, acting as one GSA. So, and I know I'm taking you on a long journey before I get to the really cool dashboards, which, But it's really important that you hear the backstory because the backstory is the reason for all this. So we've been doing one thing in Region 4, and we've seen the successes. And it took a long time, and we had to have an organizational change in our region. Everybody was doing something different, so we said, well, we're just going to make our own change. So we started looking at the way people were doing things. We used to hold actual employees who were located with the customers responsible for how much money they brought in, regardless of whether they were going any other outside influences that were not in their control. So what does that do? Well, that breeds negative competition. Most people think, oh, all of a sudden you're getting high dollars. Well, it breeds negative competition. It also causes people to only focus on those customers that have the highest dollar. I'm going to go in there and win that money. It makes people concentrate to be basically like a used car salesman. That's what our rap became, was we were used car salesmen. People didn't want to meet with a used car salesman. No offense if anybody is one. But that was the rap that we got. We were used car salesmen, and nobody wanted to talk to us. So we said, all right, how do we do something different? We saw a message a couple years ago. We have a division that put out a message that wanted more people to use our reverse auction platform. And they said, all right, well, let's call everybody and say, hey, did you know you can win all this business on the government by joining our reverse auction platform and becoming a vendor? And we read it, and you're like, no, nobody's going to answer that and get excited about joining your reverse auction platform. There's no emphasis behind it. And then I saw a video, the Simon Sinek TED Talk. Everybody heard of him? So the people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And I really bought into it, and then now we've kind of convinced our entire team into it. So we actually did an exercise at one of our team meetings, and we did a sticky note exercise in complete silence. So we have everybody in a room, and I gave them 15 minutes on a sticky note to write down their why. Why were you in this job? Why were you here? What are you doing that makes you want to be a part of this? And this was our why, the customer mission. We go into the customer, now when we talk to the customer, what GSA wants doesn't matter for us. We still have to get the rest of GSA on board, but for us, that's with the customer, our why is there. We don't have critical elements associated with, oh, you did a certain number of dollars with this portfolio, or you had a certain number of dollars here. Satisfying the customer, making sure we're helping them meet their mission faster, better, and getting things to the war fighters, getting things to the veterans, that's our why. That's why we're here. And then the last one, if not GSA, who else? There is no other agency that specializes in what we do. Our contract vehicles are the preeminent contract vehicles. Are they perfect? No. We're working to get them better. But they help the other agencies save time and money. And then it leads into your what we do. So customer interactions, we meet with customers, we help them with market research, give them free training, research, analytics solutions, et cetera. Help them find their solutions. So we came up now, we don't have a mission statement anymore. We defined our why, how, and what. I believe these will be sent out. If not, I'm happy to share it with you, but I'm not going to read it to you. But we kind of took Simon Sinek's, in his TED Talk, he actually talked about this very first sentence. First two sentences he actually says. So we kind of stole that and said, we really like that. That's really inherent in what we're doing. And then we modified the rest of it to exactly what we do. That is our mission, and that's what we do. So what this leads into is we changed our critical elements. So you're no longer held accountable to a dollar threshold. You're now held accountable to what are you doing for the customer? How much are you doing for the customer? How often are you doing it for the customer? It's all about that. The very bottom level, balanced scorecard methodology. It was met with a lot of trepidation at first. I was actually told that your reputation's on the line once. This is not going to end well for you. Are you sure you want to do this? And I came into this division 3 years ago now. And so I'm going to take you to the first dashboard here. You can ignore some of it, but who can tell me, this is just a simple SalesForce integration. Really quickly, right here, opportunity trend by created date, to the first person that raised their hand. What does this actually show you? Nobody? Yeah. Sorta. So, I'll give you a car for that one. You're the only one that raised your hand. So this is the number of opportunities loaded in SalesForce. So we still track opportunities. They're basically contracts that government agencies are awarding. These are the opportunities that we have the chance of going, that are hopefully convincing the other agencies to use GSA for. So I came on board right about here? Somewhere around in here. Right about this time frame, this is when we changed our critical elements in our entire thinking. You can see all the way back the number of opportunities, and that's for 18 to 20 people. That's the number of opportunities that were loaded each year. And now all of a sudden, we had 103 in one quarter, or 1 month this year. This is only active as of June-ish, I think is when I posted this, June or July sometime. So you can see the significant change. Are we gonna win all those as the Salesforce defines it, closed won? No, but what we're seeing is new opportunities are loaded, people are interacting with the customer more, and I'll show you a couple others that prove that as well. But it proved to the executives now, this is the first chart, and in fact the person, Irv, that I was speaking of earlier, he saw that and said, is this real? And I said, what do you mean is it real? Oh yeah, it's real. He goes, well, what was the significant change? And I said, well, there's two. One, we're meeting with the customers more. And I said, two, we're located with the customers. That's the change. Those people that are located with the customers, they're meeting with the customers more. They're finding these opportunities. And now we've changed our whole portfolio. We're now about our why. We're not trying to sell you, oh, reverse auction, that program's struggling. We're going to sell that program. Let's go sell it to the customer. Let's be a used car salesman and sell that Honda Civic or the old Pinto or something. And so you see this change. Now, what's even better about this is that, no, we're not going to win all those. Some of them are going to be closed lost. We're going to lose a lot of those. But what's even greater is now we can see, using Tableau, and I'll show you the other dashboards associated with it, we can see why we're losing those opportunities. Are we losing them because of funding loss? Are we losing them because the customer doesn't understand their own requirement? It happens a lot. A lot of agencies think that their contract is special, that it's not inherently governmental, that it's not a commercial application. All of a sudden it's, oh no, I'm special, I only do this. There's nobody on the commercial market that can do that, which is entirely false. So it's kind of driven this whole new mindset for us of, here's the proof of what we're doing in our region works. This is why this model needs to happen going forward. And so this is what we call our business centers of opportunity. So where all of our customer service directors are located, they're located in a business center of opportunity. We have all of these in, let me get this little clicker somewhere. So all of these locations in the southeast are our business centers of opportunity. We have somebody at each of them except for Augusta. What's really interesting about this is I'm not showing the entire actual dashboard or storyboard that we put together with it, but we have also linked in Google spreadsheets and we have intel associated with each of these BCO locations. The people that are assigned to these locations are constantly updating the intel, which constantly feeds into the dashboard. So if you were to look at and just say, well, I want to hire somebody in Augusta. Well, if I'm looking at these dollars, in the past, somebody would just write up a business case and say, okay, I want to hire in Augusta because so-and-so is going to relocate there, or there's a big customer there, and we think there's a lot of money. Now we have the data to prove it, but data doesn't tell the whole story. It's a good picture. For example, Augusta is really close to the actual primary customer for the rest of South Carolina, which is Shaw Air Force Base. It makes up probably 90% of this amount here. And this is for the last 5 fiscal years. It's not just 1 year. And this is all open federal procurement data you can pull off of fpds.gov. So we look at this and we say, okay, Augusta, what's actually important, and we look on the next sheet where it says Intel, the Army Cyber Command is relocating to Augusta. That's going to increase that spend level there almost $1 billion per year. That doesn't show on the data, but it now transforms what we've actually made our decision for. So now instead of just writing a business case and coming up with hypotheticals, now we have intel, now we have data, we have charts that prove it. What's even better, I think I have on the other one, yeah. So now we can look at this and we can make comparisons, direct comparisons. This actual, what you see here, as well as a couple other dashboards, is actually going to be released nationwide. It's not going to take overnight. It's going to take us a while because there's a couple coding things we want to try and do, special calculations where you can define an actual geographic map area based on a dollar threshold. And so that's what we're hoping to do, is define a geographic BCO based on a dollar threshold per customer. So that when somebody from Kansas City says, I want to hire another person, I have an open position, this person just left. And somebody from Chicago wants to hire somebody. Well, now we can say, okay, well, let's look at this dashboard and let's see, where's the intel? Are you doing your research? Oh, no, the intel sheet's empty. Well, let's see what the data compares to your two primary customers you're wanting to hire. Oh, well, it looks like Chicago's a lot higher. Sorry, Kansas City. In fact, next time you're probably going to lose 4 FTE. Don't bother even applying anymore for extra positions because you don't need them. So we're looking at it on a dollar. We know how much it costs, how much money it takes for somebody to spend with GSA for us to turn around and hire somebody. There's a dollar threshold. So each time somebody spends a certain amount of money with GSA, that is equivalent to 1 FTE that we can hire. Do we need them always? No. And that's the point of this, is we're proving that we don't always need those extra positions. The data is here to help us show why we're successful. There's, on this next one, so this one is just the Atlanta BCO. So in Atlanta, what's really cool about this is we've linked in the SalesForce data. We've shown why people are successful. The Atlanta BCO is one of our larger ones. But over here, PSU, that stands for Product Service Utilization, or otherwise known as market share. How much is somebody using your service as compared to what they could be? The performance in Atlanta has declined. We know why it has. We hypothetically knew why before, but now we've got the data, and I can show this to an executive, and actually we could show it to the person over there and say, hey, why are you not doing your job? We're going to find, here's your critical elements. You know, we've shown this is why you need to be, this is how you can be successful. And now we can take this nationally too. Everybody else, you've seen the success model. This is an exact reason here. If I were to show you the Salesforce for this person, you would see that there is 10% of the amount of activity in Salesforce. And yes, doing things in Salesforce doesn't necessarily equate to actually doing the job or being successful, but it's a good indicator of somebody who is. And that's what we've seen. Those that are the most successful, those areas that have the most interaction, the most money coming to us, are those that are most interactive in Salesforce. This area just happens to not. And for us, this is a massive decline. That essentially means, what this means right here, and the amount of dollars that is a difference in coming to GSA, I should have put that on there. The green stands how much they've come to GSA. The blue is non-GSA dollars. That basically is that person's job. And if you really look at it, we lost money. If it wasn't for some of these other areas doing so well, this person's job, there should be something that says, you're not successful because of this, this, and this. You just lost your job because you couldn't keep it. In the public sector, in normal government or non-government, private sector, people do lose their jobs because of that. So this is where we're trying to make change. How are we going to do things differently? And we're trying to use the data for that. So this dashboard here, this is really confusing for most people. I'm fortunate that my executive's really good with data. So for me, it was pretty easy to explain to him. He picked it up right away. For everybody, it's not like that. This was not my design. Like everything else in here, it's something that somebody else has already done. But that's what's great about Tableau, is the community out there is so awesome that you can pull what somebody's already created and download it and find out how to replicate it using your data. So on the left-hand side, I have BCO locations. And up top, these are government categories: facilities, IT. The circle size represents the actual PSU percentage for that category within that BCO. When you highlight over, it actually pops out the ranking to the right-hand side of each one. The actual color identifies the dollar amount that they utilize. So the PSU ranking doesn't tell the entire story. Prime example would be, let's look at Mississippi right here. So that circle size is huge. They are #1 in IT software, but they are all the way on this right-hand side of this scale for dollars, which means they aren't really bringing a whole lot of dollars. Yeah, everything that they do in that area is really great. They're coming to GSA, but the dollar threshold isn't there. doesn't tell the whole story. The PSU isn't everything, so that's why you have to keep creating different things. And this is just another way of looking at the PSU ranking. Somebody had created this for comparing cars, favorite cars by year, by color. So I took it as our, by BCO location, and I took, okay, this is our ranking. So this one right here, this blue, is Atlanta. That was the one I showed you 2 slides previous. You can see on this right there very clear that that performance is declining. This red one here, number 8, that was 8th place, basically, in FY16, all the way up to number 2. That is the Florida Panhandle. And we actually have the data to show why that happened, and we have the SalesForce data to show why that happened. Last year, we actually got, Eglin Air Force Base came to GSA for a massive, massive contract on Oasis, and those obligations are just now hitting the actual contracting source. So now you can actually see, we saw already in SalesForce that, hey, we're going to see a jump in this area next year. We knew that. We were able to predict that based on that SalesForce entry, based on the SalesForce graphics, and now we're seeing it. Again, PSU isn't everything, and it doesn't tell the whole story. This gray one here is South Florida. If I go back 2 slides or so, oops. So South Florida, right here, they are the smallest in the entire region. The amount of money that actually came to GSA, yeah, they're number 1 in product service utilization, but the amount of money that came to GSA was about $40 million a year. That doesn't even cover that person's salary. That person is in that location because 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7, something like that, whoever was in charge decided, oh, we need to put people geographically. We need to have somebody down there because there's customers down there, and we just need to make sure there's coverage. Well, you look at the data and you think, well, yeah, there's federal government agencies and they might need help, but do we really need to spend an entire FTE? And essentially, we're losing money every time we put that person is there, having somebody there. The same could actually be said for this one here, rest of South Carolina, and also this one here, East Central Florida. If you really look at it, that same could be said for those. Now, what doesn't show up on here is contract moves over the years. So in Mississippi, this one's actually a lot less. If I would have clicked on Mississippi, you would have seen the total dollars drop significantly because the Corps of Engineers relocated all their IT contracting from Jackson, Mississippi to Huntsville, Alabama. These are the intel pieces that don't show up in the data that you rely on your people with your customers. If you're not with your customer, you don't know anything. And so that's where the relationships, the SalesForce information, that's where it's come in to be important to keep track of that. Let's see here. All right, so this is our category spend by BCO. So on the circles, the bigger the circle, the larger the dollar. The color represents the actual BCO location. And then you can filter over here on category. And so what's actually really great is we have everybody in the categories has an actual account manager or a business development person. And so we can actually show if they're going, I want to go meet with your customer in, let's just make up something, Miami. I'll just use Miami because that was just on the fresh on the mind. I would pull down the category and I'd say, well, why do you want to go waste travel dollars going to go meet with that customer? Why don't instead, if you're in IT, why don't we go to Charleston and meet with somebody because they have a lot of major contracts coming, expiring soon. Let's take your money there instead of here. Just because you think that there's money at Southcom, Southern Command in Miami, everybody thinks there's money there, but there's not. It's just a feeder base basically for Central America activity. But they don't do a lot of contracting. They outsource every bit of their contracting almost. All right, moving on. All right, so this idea here, mountain of spend, was not my original idea either. There was a guy, his name is Justin Peel, I think. Kearney. He is with FICA at Wright Pat in Ohio. And I'm not going to tell you what the FICA is because I don't know what it means either. Air Force something. So there you go. So what we have here on the left-hand side is common government categories of spend, and on the right-hand side are defense-centric. What this is the entire region. I can click on any of these BCOs and it'll update specifically for that BCO, or I can click on any of these specific contracting offices. These are the top contracting offices by dollars in our region in the Southeast. I can click on any of those and see which category is the highest. Some of those, if you actually click on it, yeah, it looks like most everything is facilities, IT, and professional services. But a couple of them, if you click on it, you'll see that they're just transportation or just medical. And that's where you really start to see the actual breakdown of where the government is, what they're doing, and you can hone in your resources. Contract types. So I mentioned open market earlier. That's where essentially an agency awards their own contract. They go open market. It goes on to FedBiz Ops, and it takes forever to award a contract. Other IDIQs. This is the big one. This is where agencies create a contract, and then they just award over 5 to 10 years task orders constantly against that IDIQ contract. I'll talk into more on that, about what that means in a little bit. GSA, this is the amount that comes to GSA. So over the last 5 years, $43 billion has come to GSA. And then non-competing. These are those sole source things. Aircraft, specific missiles, drones, things like that that are basically, there's only one agency or one contractor that can do that work. Let's skip that one for now. So this is a Sankey chart. Again, I saw this somewhere else and downloaded it, figured out how to duplicate it for myself based on my own data. So it works best with fewer BCOs on the left-hand side. I can put all of them on there, but what really shows out is the Huntsville area because that's where the most spend is in our region. It's just massive, and so it kind of distorts everything else. But when you compare these, you can really see where most of the spend is going by each area. So professional services, I can track it to Central Florida as the greatest area of spend between these four. So if I was looking at a comparison for, if I had all of them up here and somebody from the professional services category came to me and said, we want to do a focus of meeting customers, we want to really do some outreach and some marketing, where would you suggest we go? I would just hover over the professional services and it would automatically update on the left-hand side and highlight for us. I actually did a calculation on the highlight that shows the top 3 customers, or the top 3 BCOs. So it highlights only those 3 BCOs in accordance with when you highlight over here, so, or when you hover over. All right, so I talked about the expiring IDIQ contracts.
What's IDIQ?
IDIQ stands for indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. That is when, I mentioned earlier, a customer awards a contract, and then they just award task orders against that contract over a period of time. It could be, let's say, I'll take an example. I don't see it up here, but in Orlando, the Army awarded one, and they called it Warfighter Focus. That was done probably 10 years ago now or so. And the value of that IDIQ contract was something in the neighborhood of $12 billion. Well, the problem with all these IDIQ contracts is they're most of the time loosely defined, and then people are awarding task orders against those that don't really fit the actual scope of that contract. Plus, they're awarding IDIQ contracts and then never using them. Well, we can see when an IDIQ contract is expiring. This is a list of the expiring IDIQ contracts. What's important about this is if we can convince them to, instead of recompeting their own IDIQ contracts, which takes 2 to 3 years sometimes, there is one agency that has one expiring in 2020 that is starting now to award their 2020 expiring IDIQ. So all those people, there's probably 20 or 30 people that will only work on awarding that contract for the next 2 years. That's all they will do. So if we can convince them instead to come to GSA, who already has IDIQ contracts with massive ceiling amounts specifically for their purpose, we've just saved them 2 years and 20 people that can do something else that's more appropriate to their mission instead of awarding a contract. So this takes us to the next one. So this is utilization rate, and this is probably the most telling one. This is just for one contract in office. This one right here, this is only those expiring IDIQs that have a utilization rate of less than 50%. 50% utilization on a contract that took you 2 years to award. Well, this one here was valued at $291 million. They're currently trying to recompete this. They're getting ready to start this. There wasn't a single dollar awarded against that IDIQ contract. This one here.
Can you give us like a real life example of what that means? I'm trying to understand.
So let's see here. This one, what was that one for? What was that one called, Steve? I'll just make up what the name was because I can't remember off the top of my head. So let's just say Satellite Launch Services for Patrick Air Force Base. Let's just make that up. It wasn't that, but that's the one off. So they awarded an IDIQ contract 5 years ago for $291 million. And on that, essentially, they would be able to award a task order against that for, let's say, building a launch pad or safety associated with rocket launches or any of those number of things. But instead, they didn't do anything. But they could have, instead of awarding that IDIQ, let's just say hypothetically they awarded $100 million against that. They could have taken that $100 million that they did award against it, and they could have come to GSA because we have launch services now on schedule. Does that make sense or no?
I think maybe part of it, the awarded, the big number at the top is the maximum value it could be.
Yeah.
We didn't really spend any of that money.
Yeah.
It's just-
This is hypothetical. So
So
up,
we've got this money tied up that could have been used elsewhere.
basically, in a way, there was never a single dime spent with this contract here. Not an actual, correct. There was a contract awarded, but no orders placed against that contract. So they spent 2 years awarding the contract and a lot of people's time, which is still, time is money, but they never awarded a single, so they never actually got anything out of 2 years worth of
Think of it
work.
in terms of capital, I'm in banking.
Mhm.
So we've allocated $100 million to some client that has never drawn on that.
Yes.
And we're paying capital against
Yes.
it. So in a government,
And somebody had to process the paperwork and all that.
money that went into doing that
Yep.
underwriting and all of that.
Yep.
And we've got that money tied up, that maybe some other customer of ours could be leveraging.
Yep.
But we've said, no, we're gonna hold this for customer A.
Basically, yeah. And so what we're trying to do is, I hate to say the word we're going after, but we are targeting these IDIQ contracts regionally, at least in our region, and it will go nationally as well, where there is no utilization. Why are you spending 2 years to award a contract with a maximum value of this, but you're only going to utilize 20% of it? That you could just as easily award task orders against GSA. And by the way, doing it against GSA, the average for a lot of these can be done in 90 days. Some of those is a little bit longer, it takes a little longer, obviously, but the average is about 90 days. Why would you spend 2 years? So that's our message to the customers when we go is, and believe it or not, they don't know this. Their executives, captains, commanders, they don't know this information. They don't have Tableau. They don't know how to calculate it. They're just decision makers. But when they see this, it opens up their eyes and they're like, you've got to be kidding me. So, all right. How am I doing on time? Okay. So this next one, this is what we call offloading. Offloading is when an agency has contracting offices, or they may not, and they decide, okay, we don't have the time or resources to award the contract, so instead we're going to send it to GSA or some other entity to award the contract for us. This is when GSA was offloaded to, is the term. You can see the top two. These are our top two assisted acquisition contracting offices. And over here is a bar chart with a line. Well, what does this stand for over here? All right, so the bars represent the number of dollars by BCO. The lines represent the number of task orders or award IDs that were associated, which is time. So our assisted acquisitions divisions can look at this and say, wow, right here in South Carolina, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck. But wow, over here in North Carolina, we're kind of breaking even. And even here, it's even worse right here in Jacksonville. 1,000 task orders for only $10 million. That's a lot of loss of time. Do we need to increase our revenue? Do we need to increase our rate? Do we need to do something, a different model? How can we do things differently so that we are recouping our time? Because that is not a good use of time and money. Tampa is also a very good example right there too, in South Florida. All right, this one's another interesting one. So if I had the live one here, what I would do, this over here is the amount of dollars by BCO location when they offloaded to somebody that wasn't GSA. So in this instance, let's take Huntsville. If I was to click on the blue, that was probably the Army. So the Army would then send their money to somebody else. Well, when they send their money to somebody else, who are they sending it to? It could be any of these over here. Well, what's really interesting is you'll find, more often than not, the Army would offload to, say, the Navy, and then over here, this is updating them on the contract vehicle type they used. And you see this one right here, Schedule 70. This is IT under GSA. So they offloaded to somebody else, paid an exorbitant fee when they could have just done it themselves on Schedule 70 with a quick award, most likely. Or they could have come to GSA, and GSA would have given a reduced rate for using GSA, most likely. So $755 million, they went from Army to Navy, then used GSA. So it's almost like a triangle when they could have just made a direct line. You kind of want to go to the experts who awarded the initial contract versus somebody else. Just kind of saying. So we use this information to our assisted acquisition division. They look at this and they say, okay, well, Army is offloading to the Navy and this specific contracting office here, and they're using Schedule 70. Well, let's go talk to the Army and just say, hey, come right to GSA. So we're starting conversations with that. Looks like I put that in there twice. All right, so this is a Coxcomb chart of SalesForce activities. How are we using this to change our activity? When you have a national force of people, it's really hard to get everybody together on when's the most opportune time to do training, when's the most opportune time to plan an industry day. What we have here is the green represents emails, the red represents face-to-face visits, and the blue represents phone calls by month. This is every BCO location for the last 5 fiscal years, just straight Salesforce data in Region 4. So when somebody tells me that they don't have time to do training in October because it's the end of the fiscal year or the beginning of the fiscal year for their customer, I can look right here and say, well, why not? You're not visiting with customers. Same thing with September. Oh, it's the end of the fiscal year. Well, you're answering quite a bit of emails, but you're not visiting customers. And what's really interesting is most of our face-to-face visits happen in January through May, a lag in June, July, and August because of vacations. But you can really get a sense, and then you can actually get a sense by per person who's doing what when, because everybody's customers are different. Some customers have certain things that they have going on during the year, and they don't want you to come out in March, April, May, because they have mandatory base operations training or something like that. So now we've done the same thing. I don't have it up here, but I've done the same thing with training. When are each of our customer service directors doing training across the nation? Are they doing training in June? Is it in person or is it virtual? How many people are attending that training in June? Did that person do training in June last year? How many people attended depending on the year? Was there less people this year? And were they duplicate people from the year before? So now we're able to start honing in on when we do things and when's the most optimal time. We're not the only decision makers. This is a national thing that we're trying to implement here. So you're talking about 50 people that are going to have to be involved to bring all this together and make these decisions. But now we've got the data. Before, people would just say, they would just come up with excuses just because it's what they've always heard. Why change something because you've always heard that? Well, now we've got the data to prove this is when we really should be doing things. Yeah? So this data is just straight out of Salesforce. It is I actually have to, because in Tableau, it isn't a live connection to Salesforce, it's an extract. There's so much activity data, you actually have to download the report directly out of Salesforce itself. Not time on the phone, just when they log a phone call. Not everybody logs phone calls, but they log emails pretty easily and face-to-face visits, because the face-to-face visits are a critical element tracker. We're holding them accountable to how often they're meeting with their customers and when. We want them, it's a large number, and so that's the most frequently entered thing is email because it's easy, and face-to-face visits because we hold them accountable to that.
This looks like what kind of chart, like how are you doing this chart too? That's what I'm making you now.
So somebody else had done this chart, I stole that idea too. And I actually had to take the Salesforce data and then upload it using the legacy connection and doing a custom SQL to duplicate the data. And I don't have it on my thumb drive here, but I could show you, but I didn't bring it. But if you want to, No, I had to do a trigonometry calculation that created an angle, and then you had to do, there's about 5 or 6 other calculations you have to do. It's actually fairly simple when you actually, sorry, sorry. When you actually look at how, like, and that's the great thing I was kind of saying earlier about the Tableau stuff is you download somebody else's visualization, and you look at what they've done, and you can kind of backtrack. It's almost like solving a problem the reverse way. You look at how they did it, and then you can kind of figure out, okay, well, is this something that is it a created calculated field right here in Tableau, or did I have to create a whole separate data set for it? And for this, it was just importing the Excel using a legacy connection. And the guy is actually named Barian or something like that. He has a whole page with instructions on how to do it too. Step-by-step instructions, and then there's a whole dialogue down below of people who've had issues, and he helped fix it and stuff like that. So it wasn't easy, but I did finally figure it out. All right, so I mentioned we were tracking SalesForce, and this is, I renamed everybody's name. This one's kind of thrown out of whack because there's an opportunity somebody loaded that probably that shouldn't have been loaded. But anyway, you can see this is the open opportunities that we have right as of, I think it was July. So what I can do is, this gives an executive a really quick look at what we're doing. So I can see, all right, who are the top categories? Currently open opportunities, when were they created? Most of them this year and last year. And even then you can see specific details, but what's even greater is I can click on it, each of those opportunity IDs there, and it'll take you directly to SalesForce and open up that opportunity. So if an executive is really interested, because they do, well, I don't know if they do anymore, they used to, before we had our new commissioner, they did these stat meetings. And they would have these stat calls, and that's what they called it, was stat. And they would have random SalesForce opportunities, and this was only for regional commissioners and commissioners of other divisions and stuff like that. And they would have SalesForce opportunities listed in here. And the regional commissioners were expected to know about this. Well, my regional commissioner, former regional commissioner being pretty good with data, he already had this. So I essentially, we did create a SalesForce dashboard to send him, but then I just gave him this. And so now, anybody asked about it, he knew what it was titled. He could I actually had a filter set up on it for him, where he could just type in the name and it would automatically appear down here with anything related to that, with that name in there. He could type it in and it would automatically highlight for him down here. And he clicks on it and it takes him to Salesforce, and he can, on the spot, tell the FAST commissioner about that opportunity, what happened with it, current details about it, everything he knows. And closed loss details. I mentioned earlier, most of our closed loss are canceled, no longer a valid requirement. And that's probably the biggest one that we're trying to study right now. Why do we have no longer a valid requirement? Does that mean it shouldn't have even been entered? Did they lose their funding? Did somebody enter it wrong? We're just now starting to, we have this information, we're looking at it, and I mentioned to you it's really important that we have it, because now we can see where we need to develop other sources. Lack of GSA, that one interests me, because why would you load an opportunity if it's a lack of GSA solution? It just doesn't make sense. You should already know before you load it that there is not a GSA solution, so why would there be a lack of GSA solution? There's a couple other breakdowns in here that we're really starting to study and trying to figure out, and then we get with the actual customer service directors and we kind of say, all right, you know, you entered one for less than $1 million, and then you lost it for camping kits. Couldn't they have just, you disqualified it, couldn't they have just gone on GSA Advantage and typed in camping kits and found something? They could have bought it probably right on the spot, most likely. If it's camping kits, it's not very expensive, so it's probably something that could be done with a credit card instead of awarding a contract, just guessing. Then you see the other things in here. So a CFL, that stands for Computers for Learning. GSA basically gives computers for free to schools. Used computers, not new ones. Used computers. So all the used computers are donated to schools for free. Sometimes people load them as opportunities in SalesForce, even though they really shouldn't be. It's just an actual extra duty. They load it to show something that they've done during the year. And I guess that's the last of my slides. So, did anybody have any questions or anything they want to see differently? Yeah. Sorry.
PCOs. I mean, how are those similar entitled regions, similar states? Is that based on population or?
No, it's strictly based on the total spend of each customer. It has to, if a customer has over $300 million in spend, we qualify that as a BCO per year, 300 million per year. And then from there, it kind of goes geographically. For example, Huntsville has multiple BCO type customers. I think it's probably like 6 or 7 that are over that. I think they have 4 of them that are over $1 billion a year. So you kind of define that geographically. So it's initially developed based on that key customer. What's the key customer? Tampa BCO is actually SOCOM, Southern Command, which is $3 billion a year. So that's defined initially around that one key customer. Anywhere else, Wright Pat Air Force Base would be the key customer in Ohio, and then the surrounding area around that would make up that market territory per se. Yeah.
So my question has to do with your adoption. Obviously, you've done a lot of great development here, and you can demonstrate via fact the benefit of the GSA and the value that you bring to these PCOs. What's your plan when you say, like, people don't see this data? What's your plan to get further adoption and buy-in and expand the eyes that get to view this to build out? Because, again, it's tremendous efficiency and cost savings that you're really driving through the GSA. How do you shift that mentality in the government? Because you've got a center of excellence there, right?
Yeah.
How do you get more adoption, and what's your plan for
Well, first you have to get the buy-in from one important person, which I've done. The person that was supposed to be here with me, he is that person. So he is now the National Case Assistant Commissioner. So he's not the most important person, but he wouldn't be in that position if he didn't have the buy-in from our new FAST Commissioner who was appointed by President Trump. Our FAST Commissioner is, you got GSA Administrator who's, I forget her last name now. Anyway, then you've got the FAST Commissioner. He was appointed by the President. His name is Alan Thomas. He is basically the big boss for us. So Irv, who's essentially my boss, has Alan Thomas's ear. And so that's how we're starting this process. This process of this dashboarding, the hiring model for case, that's going to end up going nationally at some point in time. Whether every regional commissioner can get buy-in remains to be seen, but we've got the ear of Alan Thomas, who is the FAST Commissioner, and he's the most important person. And so if you can get the buy-in of one important person, that's where it starts, the trickle-down effect, getting everybody to buy in. And then we've got customers buying in. A lot of this data is duplicated on a different level in different dashboards, but we've taken the same data, FPDS contract data, Federal Procurement Data System, and we've put it into an actual presentation for customers. We've gone to high-level customers and shown them their own contracting data. Here's where your money's going. Here's how it's going. Here's how you could have done it faster. Here's how you can save 15% of your time by coming to GSA. Yeah?
Got 2 questions, back to not for you, back to the group. How many people in here are with the government agency?
Wow, awesome.
And of those people who are with the government agency, how many of you are using Tableau currently to, who's with the government agency again, put your hands up? So now, of those with your hands up, who is currently using Tableau to provide dashboards and information for their command? Everybody? I see the hands go down. You guys are all developing for yourself the same way that you do it, correct? Awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
Just kind of going a little further into the adoption side of things. One of the big issues that we've hit in terms of distributing Tableau and the visits across the agency is both the lack of familiarity, lack of reader, and just general, like, once people see it, they love it, but getting it in front of the right people at the right time. So I'm just kind of wondering how you and your team have tried to bridge that gap. It sounds like you pretty successfully bridged it in the administration.
A lot of it is showing the value in what you've created. And so when you create something simple for somebody to understand it first, it brings them in. If you show, there's always going to be that same person, that one executive who wants to see an Excel spreadsheet. I have one. There is one who still wants to see an Excel spreadsheet. But that's just how that person looks. But the majority of people, when they see the very basics of what you've created, and you can quickly show how it relates to them very quickly, then they become interested and they want to see more. Then they have more questions. Asking them something that's related to them and then getting them to have that feedback, that's where you'll start to get the buy-in is, how does this relate to me? And so you got to put yourself in their shoes always. You're not creating it for yourself, you're creating it for other people. And so what other question do you want to answer? What other problem do you want to solve? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Essentially every contract that was awarded, so it's contracting office information, spend data, where it was spent, how it was spent. Yeah, everybody, government-wide.
Is that how you get the, you had a stat for
Addressable? So what that means is, I'll bring it up for you. So there's agencies have a total spend, which is made up of basically everything that they can spend with the government, or with at all, every dollar that they award. Then there's addressable spend, which is only stuff that GSA can handle. So the difference between the total spend and the addressable spend is those missiles, weapons, airplanes, tanks, things like that. So we don't factor any of that stuff into our numbers because we can't do anything about it. Yeah. Well, there's it's actually called contract category code. And so there's category codes of 1 through 7 and then A, B, C, D. And GSA represents basically 1 through 7. So basically anything that's 1 through 7 is what we filter in as what could have been done on GSA. Plus 1 through 7 and maybe B and D, I think. One of them represents non-competing contracts, which are planes and stuff like that, the missiles, and we can't do anything about that. And the other one is, I can't think of it off the top of my head, but so we filter that out at the actual data source level.
I've never thought to use FPDS to get everyone's data. We just concentrate on our own, so that just speeds things up.
Who are you with?
Department of Interior.
Okay.
Acquisition Bureau.
Yeah. It's good to see the other comparisons too, where people are putting their money.
Yeah, you were on one of those charts. The offloading one.
Any other questions? Here you go, Dorothy. Is that it? All right. If you could take your survey, but everybody else left already, so. Thank you.